Hi, and welcome to Night Clerk Radio. This is episode 85, Folktronica Exploration, where we are exploring a new genre called Folktronica, which is the intersection between folk music and electronica. That's where the term comes from. And with me, as always, is my good friend and co-host, Burke. How you doing?
Good. How are you, Ross?
I'm doing good. This has been an interesting episode to prepare for because it made me realize I don't know much about folk music. It is something, one of those genres of music that's like, I like some folk music. You know, when I was a kid, I think the first song that I ever remembered listening to and like understanding the lyrics and having them impact on me was Tracy Chapman's Fast Car, which is a folk song. Yeah, I was like, oh, wait, she's talking about people like me because we're, poor and uncertain and unstable. Like, I relate to that. And I have emotions about it. And, obviously it's, a great song. But it's not like folk music is not like a genre I listen to a lot of. It is interesting, and there's certainly folk music I like, but it's not like one of my go-to genres. How about you?
Well, wait, you're from Springfield. Aren't you like legally obligated to listen to like Ballad of Jesse James and stuff?
I said I listen to folk music on occasion. There's a folk group here called the Ozark Mountain Daredevils that's been around for decades, and in fact was at the Smithsonian Folk Life Festival that is going on right now or just ended. Yeah, they were just showcasing Ozark's folk culture and music and that kind of thing up at the Capitol. And so like I like I said, I do like it. It's just not like a daily, not a daily listen genre, I guess.
Sure.
Like it's an occasional, as a little treat every once in a while.
Yeah, like it's an interesting question to answer because it requires like defining what we mean by folk, right? Like it's like the first difficult part. Because I definitely could say that I grew up listening to stuff that might be adjacent, right? From my parents, like Johnny Cash, like that country or like
outlaw western,
a lot of outlaw western cowboy music. Yeah, being near the Appalachians, there's Appalachian variations on folk, which ends up in like Chet Atkins, some Dolly Parton, Loretta Lynn, Bruce Springsteen type stuff. Yeah,
country music is like. When we mean folk music, there's actually like several types of folk music. There's actual folk music, like traditional music, played on instruments that was created by anonymous performers, decades or centuries ago, that is just kept alive through oral tradition and folk culture. And then there's contemporary music made by professional musicians in that vein that's performed. And then there's country music, which is like derives from folk music, but has become its own like thing. So there's a lot of things to mean folk.
Yeah. And then there's like the rise of pop folk, like Bob Dylan and stuff. And through that counterculture era. So it's tricky, but definitely grew up a lot of that 50s through 60s country in the house.
And then there's like, you can use folk as a descriptor for new subgenres, kind of like rock or metal. Like there's literally folk metal. And dark folk and like there's
synth folk.
That's what we're doing, right? Like
a little bit. Yeah. So it gets tricky because then that's just like a US centric view of like what folk is, right? So like also like Eastern European has its own folk tradition, or through the Mediterranean has its own folk tradition, or like Northern versus Sub-Saharan Africa, or Thai, Chinese, Australian, just Australian.
Like literally every culture in the world.
Like every culture has its own folk. So it's an elusive one.
In some ways, like in the industry or the way music is sold and distributed, it is kind of like world music, right? Like it's that vague, it's not rock or pop or any of our recognized, music store labels. Therefore, it's just all shoved into a corner over here, and we call it folk. You know it when you see it, or you know it when you listen to it.
Probably one of those things that also has like, of course it does, has like class connotations associated with it. Oh yeah. Of like, we'll call stuff folk, like you're saying, if it's more related to lower income people, whereas like
working class. Yeah.
Whereas like world or new age is almost like a bougie insult. Like I think of in High Fidelity, like he insults Tim Robbins' character by saying he probably listens to like new age world music because he's like jealous and hater. He's so there's probably like also how stuff gets wrapped up.
Yeah, but world music is kind of like this is the music made by people that are featured in National Geographic magazine, it's very, this is the noble savage, the Rousseauian ideal.
Yeah, and I think his use of it as an insult in High Fidelity is almost like as like a cultural tourist more than like an appreciator type deal.
Yeah. I like that.
Like I have some sitars in my music or whatever. Even though I don't care about like the raga tradition or anything like that.
Yeah.
So then you combine that with electronica, which is also a wriggly little genre.
Yeah, no, it is, because it's just literally any music made with like electronic or digital synthesized anything. And when you look at Folktronica, I think it's one of those genres that's like a marketing term, right? But like it sort of popped up in the early 2000s. And for me, it's 100%. I'm interested in this because of Fortet. Like there was a period where I listened to early Fortet album, like just over and over again. Like I want to say There Is Love in You is just one. There was like a period where I listened to There Is Love in You, and I think Rounds, a lot of that, just over and over again.
I feel like we've also discussed Fortet and like Burial at some point.
Oh,
previously.
Sure. Yeah. Fortet is just one of these producers, art performers, musicians, whatever you want to call them, that is very wide discography and like has put a lot of really interesting work out, and that is always kind of intersects with some of the stuff that we talk about. So yeah. But yeah, that's where I was like, oh yeah, Fortet. It's the Fortet music.
Hold on.
Yeah. that was when I heard out that there's Folktronica was a thing and that Fortet did it. I was like, oh well, okay, yeah, I like the Fortet.
A little bit, yeah. And I think it also came up. We mentioned as a genre that was promoted by Ghostbox Records, who we did for our second hauntology episode, Hauntology 2.0. And I think that also sparked some interest. So
yeah, there is a list of Folktronica artists on Wikipedia, and they list like Bjork, who I also like, and Bon Iver is another one.
See, I was saying it's Bon Iver.
Oh, Bon Iver. Oh,
yeah.
Ella Goulding, huh?
Yeah.
Like that one hit she put out. I don't think I've listened to much of her work, but yeah. Are there any other artists on this list that really grab your attention?
No, like, I mean, I really like Bjork and Bon Iver and stuff. Not ones I really think of. It's interesting. It's one of those genres where I didn't really think I had much overlap with, but I have listened to some of the names that come up, but I don't really think of it as like Folktronica per se. Like I just didn't have like a word to put to it. And I still don't, like, in some sense. I don't know. This is a very tricky.
Yeah, it's not a term that's used very much now. Like it seems to like the height of it was in the early mid 2000s. And since then it's kind of like people just use other terms that describe the same kind or similar kinds of music. Yeah. Yeah. So
yeah, a lot of stuff is like indie electronica or that sort of more generic term. I don't know if folk aspect of it became taboo for some reason or it just dropped out of style.
Yeah.
So that could be the other reason it feels a little more unfamiliar. Just being a little older.
But, you know, people are still making music like that.
Oh, sure.
And there's a lot of interesting music out there.
Yeah, there is. This was before we get into the albums, because we are doing, of course, 2 Folktronica albums. This is an atopic episode. But I'm really glad that we did find the albums we did because I really like both of them. But also because I was getting a little demoralized looking for music because a lot of it just felt like acoustic indie. A lot of like, because I was looking through like Bandcamp lists or like Ghostbox Records. I was like, well, there's this Ghostbox Records connection from a previous episode. So why don't we just look at what they have on their label? And it was like good, but not really the kind of stuff I want to talk about.
Yeah.
Or it was just, acoustic vocals and like a little bit of synth over it, which was less interesting to me than what we ended up with, which is much more ambient soundscapey.
Yeah. And also just a really interesting use of this juxtaposition between like very traditional instruments, a lot of woodwinds, and also just like but also like really avant-garde kind of like producing techniques like field recordings, just mixing in like a lot of real instruments with these like analog synths, and in this very layered soundscapey kind of way, but not like just a total drone. Like there are melodies, and there's a structure to these songs. And one of the things I kind of found, at least for these two albums that we reviewed, there is this kind of like interesting connection to vaporwave, like in terms of its production techniques and like and Haunted, but like in some ways it's the polar opposite of vaporwave, because vaporwave is about alienation and disassociation and like anxiety and dissonance, right? And like I felt both of these albums were very wanting to be like more sincere and comforting and like chaotic and messy, but like still life affirming. Like they still felt more uplifting and positive and warm. I think if I had to use a single word to describe both of these albums, it would be warmth, like in terms of the sound, like like in Haunted, but like in a Guillermo del Toro way, like where it's kind of spooky but more sad, and then ultimately
does folk horror.
Who does folk horror? Yeah, like folk is just becoming a huge explosion in the last like 5 years. Like folk horror is a thing now, or like we finally recognize it as a subgenre of horror. Like
sure,
I watched this 3-hour documentary about the various types of folk horror. It's on Shudder, and so it's an interesting contrast to vaporwave, and it like introduced me to artists I'd never heard of before.
So why don't we get into it? That is from track 2 of the album Ears by Caitlin Aurelia Smith. The track is called Wetlands. So this is an interesting album, an interesting one to research, because it's not often that we do artists that you can just go look them up and that they want to be looked up. I mean, there's, you can look up some. But vaporwave, there's a lot of anonymity, especially among some artists. But so Smith is a composer. She's from the Pacific Northwest, but in LA currently. What's interesting is she is educated in both composition and music and sound engineering and production at Berkeley, where she did folk music. And you can hear it on this album and in her other work is that she's largely known for being really into Buchla synthesizers, which is like the West Coast synth we've talked about.
Yeah, it's like it's like the contrast to like what the Moog was trying to do. Like,
It's much more modular, much more like organic. She really likes the 100 series, which was like the original one from the 60s. Yeah. And she talks about liking that like unpredictability of those old electronics, because if like just something changes a little bit in the room electronically, then you can end up with like all kinds of like unpredicted sounds. Like if something's just not quite grounded properly, like because modern hardware is much more hardened against that.
More reliable.
She talks about it giving it like an organic nature, like a biofeedback nature, which I think really comes across in the music.
Yeah, I think my understanding is like the Moog, like Wendy Carlos Williams really like them, and they're trying to emulate like traditional instruments, but making an electronic sound. But like the Buchla is like, this is entirely new stuff. Why don't we like change how this instrument works and make something that is entirely new? And so they were exploring and trying to be and reinvent or create very new instruments for a very new type of technology. And so it's like a different philosophy in them. And so, and you can definitely hear it in this album.
That's a really good way of putting it. I was trying to remember how we described it because I know we've talked about it before on an episode, but
there's a really good
words together
documentary about them called I think it's called I Dream of Wires, and it's just like 2 or 3 hours long of people just talking about the differences and the who were there when both of these companies were founded and like how they operate and why they were different and all that other good stuff. Anyways,
like I said, I think it comes across in this music because this is an album that very much feels like alive. Like I think it's a combination of being interesting uses of synth, but then there's also like traditional analog, whatever you want to call them. We'll call them analog in honor of Star Trek. Sorry, that's a Picard joke. Because there's like saxophones come in, there's percussion, there's a lot of vocals. She does a lot of like ambient or like vocalizing on tracks and blends that really well into the synth. Which you heard in that opening sample from Wetlands, where there's like these modulated vocals. Like it starts with nature and field recordings and then goes into like these kind of modulated vocals come out of it. And there's like this deep thumping percussion. And it's all just like this rich layered soundscape. It's great.
Yeah, there's a lot of like vocals as an electronic instrument because they're like very heavily like it has like the vocals have this kind of ethereal quality to them. They sound very unearthly, very obviously. I don't know exactly what she did, but you did something to her voice to make it sound so unusual. And I quite like it because I'm not sure, like she's singing, I can't really understand the lyrics, but like it gives it this kind of like distant or not distant, but like, I guess, again, unearthly feeling to it.
Ethereal.
Yeah. I really like track 1 too, because it has this very fluttery open and it sounds like a PBS kids show, like on Science, like again, which is like a very analog synth kind of sound. Like it's kind of this retro sound, but like on or newer album. I mean, this came out like 2016.
Yeah. Spring of 2016. Yeah. Yeah. Track 1's interesting because it is all like these like ascending like arpeggios moving around. It is because it is called First Flight, so it is like learning to fly in some sense.
Yeah,
like the Magic School Bus taking off to go with your discussion. But then it moves into like really interesting. I think what struck me as interesting about this album is that a lot of these tracks are these little like ambient vignettes almost, where they start off, they're 3 to 5 minutes long, and they start off with like some sort of like more soundscapey ambient, and then bring in saxophone or vocals or like more structure, and they kind of grow out into a thing, and then you move on to like a new idea, which I sort of liked because a lot of the ambient made me think a lot of like some of Eno's ambient work, but more compressed, not like these big like 20-minute tracks like Music for Airports or something, but like these like little meditative vignettes almost. I love the sax. At first I was not expecting real instruments. I don't know why. I think just because of the nature of what we usually listen to.
Yeah.
Frankly.
I mean, this is, again, the Folktronica part. Like, oh, yeah, there's folk elements. It's not just electronica.
Yeah. So, like, the sax that comes in is really nice on, like, track 3. Track 7 is entirely sax melody driven.
I like track 7 a lot. It has this kind of really nice stereo effect of, like, panning, as the instruments go into, it's almost kind of like a round. Like, you can hear instruments ending and beginning, like, overlapping each other. It was pretty neat.
Yeah, but there are tracks that are darker. I guess we talked about some things being a little like dark or haunted, right? So let me play a sample from track 6. So that was from Arthropoda, which is track 6. So arthropods are, of course, like centipedes and little creepy crawlies, right? Little invertebrates. I hope their centipedes are in there. think like scorpions, like anything with like a little chitinous exoskeleton, I thought are lower classifications. Anyway, but the point is like it starts off with like this like skittering kind of like nature sounds.
Yeah.
And grows into like this pulsing coming up and down. And then like the vocals join in and there's like this like celebration almost of these little guys.
Yeah. The track kind of goes nuts towards the end. Like it's very good. I really like the synth scale kind of building up in intensity. Yeah.
A lot of variety, a lot of interesting composition. And then, you know, it ends on this big, long meditative track, like all the other tracks.
On
the shorter side. And the last one just is like this 11 minutes of, and I almost don't realize it's one track because it does.
Yeah, it feel like a couple of tracks put together for some reason. Like it begins, the beginning is like, oh, this is like an 80s news show about the stock market. Like in the, well, the opening, right? But then it changes like so much.
Yeah. It just goes through this whole journey that is almost like a microcosm of the album in some sense. Maybe like all the other tracks kind of rolled into one. Not musically, it doesn't like reuse leitmotifs or whatever, but like of that feeling of like moving through all these locations and these exploring all these various natural aspects. I think the way I ultimately describe this album is that it feels like good new age has arrived. And I don't know if that's getting like older or like less irony dipped or whatever, but I always thought of new age growing up as like cheesy or tropey or like really weird ham-fisted spirituality, like faux Buddhism or whatever.
Well, a lot of new age music is very like distant, right? Like it's very like almost clinical. It's like this very precise, very like, I mean, like a layered soundscape, but like entirely synthesized. It's not like they would never have like field recordings except for maybe like water dripping or like waves, you know, something generic like that. Yeah. But like this is again like a very messy kind of album because you're adding in all kinds of field recordings and really mixing things in. Yeah, there's some tracks that lean more folk and some more electronica, and there's it's exact opposite of like most like new age, like this is the music you would hear in a day spa kind of thing. Yeah. They would not play this at a day spa, I think.
No, they would not. Yeah. They should, but they won't.
Yeah. Cause this is even though this is like more ambient, right? Like this is still an album that like, hey, pay attention to me. This is not something to just like put on and forget about. Like I'm going to change, you know, there's going to be some crazy shit going on here.
Yeah, it does hit that good middle ground of like really good ambient soundscape of like keeping your attention, but not trying to. Like it doesn't have dramatic moments or anything that like you're just drawn into it, like in a completely organic way. Yeah,
like when the saxes come in, like they don't come in often, but every time like, oh hell yeah, love the saxes. Yeah.
Exactly. So overall, really fantastic introduction to Folktronica for me. Although I guess as we stated, it's not maybe an introduction, but I'm going to say it is.
Well, it's good to like find that there's Folktronica outside of like the big names, right? Like,
sure. Yeah. For any genre, right? Like it's so interesting to dig into the weeds of any genre and figure out what's in there.
That was track 6, All Watched Over by Machines of Loving Grace from The Hill, the Light, the Ghost by Haiku Salute, which is a lovely name for a Folktronica group and a group I'd never heard of before we started looking into this. So this came out in August of 2021. So it's fairly new. And yeah, this is a lovely meditation on life and just memories. And again, a very warm mixture of field recordings, analog synths, real instruments. I quite enjoyed it. There's even a little video that explains like the context or the idea, the concept of this album. Mm-hmm. Did you see that?
No, I did not.
Okay. So yeah, it's called Introducing the Hill, the Light, the Ghost. And essentially the Haiku Salute was touring in Europe. And for track 1, which is Wide Awake, they went to this abandoned house in Germany, just out in the middle of nowhere. Well, it was in a city, I believe. And they walked around. You know, they had this field recorder that they wanted to try out. And so they went into the house and just recorded and took photographs, recorded the sound of the house and took photographs of it, of this house that was left abandoned with like the people's possessions left. We then began actively searching for ghosts in the world and framing the songs around their qualities, gathering recordings, removing them from their context and building worlds around them, capturing and preserving personal experiences and invoking vivid spaces. In 2019, we went to Berlin to play a show. And we made a trip of it and drove the whole way. Somewhere west of Berlin and north of Frankfurt, we stopped to visit a house that had been abandoned since the 80s. When we arrived, the front door was wide open. There were still shoes lined up in the front porch. The house itself had fallen into disrepair. There's debris and broken windows and peeling wallpaper in every room. Anyways, they go into exploring the house. There's a piano in it. And we hadn't sampled the piano yet for fear of alerting someone to our presence. They went back in to get like one note, entered the door, played a few notes. There's a tiny black and white photograph on the keys of a woman and her dog. So they used that recording, obviously, in the first track. And so each track is a very personal story, at least to them. So I don't know if like the physical version has like liner notes that explain the story behind all the tracks, but it's a fascinating album because there's a lot of variation in the tracks. There's a lot of, again, this warmth really comes through, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting. I knew that I did not know the story behind the field recordings. I knew that they had talked about having like a little task cam and carrying it around. Mm-hmm. But that's interesting. Yeah. So this album was also really interesting. Like I'd never heard of Haiku Salute until they turned up on, I think like I saw them on a Bandcamp Folktronica list, one of those articles that's, you know, like here's 5 to 8 albums from a certain genre.
Yeah.
And they were on there and I was like, I'd not heard of them. And it's like a trio and it's like, this is their 5th albums. And I have to go listen to 4 other albums and see, although apparently they vary a lot, which I actually like. Mm-hmm. But yeah, like I love the field recordings. I love like so creepy and haunted. I don't know. This felt like more of a haunted album than Ears to me, which I thought was interesting, but
oh, actually, it was track 2, not track 1. That was the German house. But anyway, sorry.
Okay. Yeah. No worries. Yeah, it's just really, really enjoyed listening to it. Just so creepy.
A lot of it also reminds me of like early Fortet too, because it has these like sound effects, these like rattle snaps, these like it builds up a lot, like layering these like the sounds of stones clacking or like things of that nature. It kind of a pulsing soundscape. This is not criticism of the album, but I felt like at the end of track 2, it's like, oh my God, folk music has just been taken over for corporate advertising. Like the end of that felt like the end of like Microsoft unveiling some new product or something. Like it's just,
well, that's like an Ouroboros of media representation though, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, no, it's not a dig at them. It's more just a lament that like, advertising has to ruin everything.
Yeah, imagine if you're a ukulele fan.
Oh my God! Ooh, yeah. Let me pour one out for the ukulele enjoyers. They're having a bad year this time. Boy, oh man.
Sorry, I'll let you get on with your point.
No, like again, there's a lot of the like track 1. It kind of like you have these field recordings of birds, gentle strings, like it. To me, it's like, oh, this is the morning after a Civil War battle. It's like sad and like, oh, all these people are dead in this beautiful natural environment, and there's a real interesting variation of like some tracks are more natural, real instruments and some tracks are, more folk and some are more electronica. Like track 6 is, in fact, very EDM focus. Like there's a really complex beat, and it really gets into this very complex layered symphony of electronica. It's very cool. So I really do like a lot of the variation, like how these tracks really build up. They really like set a foundation, sort of building up. So track 9, the last one, All Clear, has this really great example of that, with the guitar. And so why don't we play that? God, yeah, this is definitely a really enjoyable album because, again, it feels like so close yet so far away from Vaporwave in that it's more like you're going to feel more good rather than depressed about your life after listening to this. But, maybe a bit sad. But like, I think maybe that's one of the things that folk music is trying to go for, at least contemporary folk music, is trying to be more comforting and life affirming than like, more of a celebratory thing, like recognizing that like life is painful, but like trying to hold on in spite of all the bullshit in life. I mean, like going back to like fucking Fast Car, like that's like, maybe we can get out of here. Maybe we can get in the car and get out of this shitty little town and go to a place where we'll have a better life, like that distant hope, despite the hardness of life. So it's not like blindly utopian, but like just hoping for something better. So more, optimistic versus depressed.
Yeah. Because I definitely think there's some more like somber but upbeat songs, or maybe not literally upbeat in terms of like fast tempo. But I really like track 4. I Dreamed I Was Awake for a very long time, because it is like this kind of like slow, optimistic build.
I like the horns.
Yeah. Horns and synth coming through. Just really grows over like its 5-minute runtime. So I remember that one being maybe one of the first ones that pulled me in a bit more.
And then track 5 is like a little more like downbeat,
Yeah. It's the come down.
Yeah.
I guess it ends up a little more like on the somber side of things.
Yeah. So yeah, it's not like blind. Like that's the thing about new age music. It's just like blindly be happy, just be happy, and everything is good and everything is fine and there's nothing wrong. And there's like just trying to erase all the unpleasantness. And like folk music is like life is good despite the unpleasantness. I think that's the difference. And so like that's why it reads as more authentic and more, real, even though it is using all of these, electronic instruments that are usually associated with like, science fiction and spaciness and weirdness and like unreal stuff.
Yeah.
So that's something to think about.
I just also wanted to talk about one last little thing that I thought was interesting on the album, which are tracks 7 and 8. So I really like track 7. It's like lo-fi. It's like staticky and crackly. And there's like soft piano. But both that and track 8 have like clockwork field recordings. Yeah, they have like they sound like a wind-up toy.
Yeah.
Or a watch or a pocket watch.
Yeah,
or
like a wind-up music box. Yeah, something like
music box, maybe something that winds up.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting that those back-to-back had that. I didn't know what to make of it, but they are both kind of like more distant and sad compared to some of the other tracks. I thought that was sort of interesting.
Oh yeah, no, thank you for bringing that up. This is also one of the things that reminded me of Fortet, because I think Fortet also liked those types of sounds to throw into his tracks, at least his early stuff. I haven't actually listened to Fortet in a while. I haven't caught up with his current work, so I need to do that. But yeah, no, the clockwork stuff, just perfect. I love a good clockwork, sound in the background. Just, yeah.
And much like ears, it's those kind of little details that make you want to like listen again because you're like, oh, what else did I miss in all the other tracks? Like, did my focus falter for a brief second and I missed something interesting in track 2 or 3 or whatever? And now I got to listen again. And that's the kind of stuff that keeps you engaged.
Thanks for listening to our exploration into a new genre. I don't know if we'll visit this again anytime soon because it was hard to find albums, but we'll certainly keep an eye out for the ear out for future Folktronica expeditions.
We're always open to recommendations.
Yeah.
There's so much to dig through that if you know a lot about this and really like some of this stuff, just let me know.
Yeah, that would be great. Post on our Discord or our social media accounts. In our next episode, though, we're going to be just looking at one album, but a very interesting album. It is the 2023 Vaporwave Up and Comers compilation. So there's all kinds of Vaporwave artists looking to make their presence known, even if they want to remain anonymous. And so we'll be going through this. How many? It's quite a few tracks.
It's a good, nice long one.
29 tracks. Yeah, 29 tracks. So there's quite a bit to
27. The last 2 tracks are just the cassettes. So
okay.
All is one batch. But yeah, so this is put together by Polyglot, who we've done before on the show, and Zero, who we've also talked about, did all the artwork. So it's put together. I'm really excited to dig into it.
Yeah. I really like the album art, a very VHS cassette. Well, also, if you like this episode, please check out our Patreon, patreon.com/nightclerkradio. We have bonus episodes every month. We have a great community Discord of music fans who love enjoying talking about Folktronica, Vaporwave, Dark Ambient, all the good stuff. A lot of cool album recommendations on there. And we are on social media right now. We're on Twitter at Nightclerk Radio. I just last night got a Blue Sky account. I've not set it up yet, so I need to set that up.
There's a Nightclerk Blue Sky. Yeah.
Yay. We have a website, nightclerkradio.com, Facebook page, Nightclerk Radio. And don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcast, Spotify, whatever you use to listen to podcasts. And we're on YouTube as well. You can listen to all of our episodes on YouTube, all of our main episodes. And thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next time.